Okay, this is day 7 of my complex PTSD from surviving to thriving, reading through the book, which is Complex PTSD, Pete Walker. And it's been a book that's changed my life, and I'm putting this information out there for people that have been through child abuse, violence, sexual abuse, and such like. And you can see my book's been well read because the pages are actually falling out. So I'm going to have to get a new one at some point, or get it bound, something like that. Right, so I'm going to continue reading what we were talking about, the inner critic, in my last few videos. And the last section of this book mentions that he says, this is page 187, and it is chapter 9. And he says here, once again, my experience is that the more I practice the thought substitution of focusing on what I am grateful for, the sooner genuine gratitude returns to me on the occasions that I lose touch with it. So as I read this, if you want to get where I'm coming from on what I've just said, go back and see the previous video on my live streams. Continuing reading. He says, a powerful way to practice perspective correction is as follows. After you go to bed at night, list at least 10 positive happenings of the day. More often than not, these will not be peak experiences, but rather basic and simple pleasures and appreciations. They may be as simple as a catchy tune, an engaging color, a sweet sense, an enjoyable food serving of the day, a new flower in a local garden, a satisfying TV show, a neighbor's hello, a feeling of fitness climbing the stairs, soothing words from a favorite author, or a pleasant encounter with a pet. Decades of this practice have helped me immeasurably to upgrade the sour perspective I inherited from my parents. Alignment with this function of the healthy observing ego. The healthy observing ego, I lost myself there, provides us with a more balanced and accurate perspective of life and other people. So the more we heal and the more we do things that get rid of the inner critic, the more we're going to get to a place of not suffering as much, and we'll normalize. But this does take inner awareness, mindfulness, and work. And the first thing that we need to do is get rid of the inner critic before we really do anything else, because the inner critic is the thing that stops us from healthy blame. It stops us from healthy angering, and the inner critic needs to know that it's not in charge anymore because it's unhealthy, the one that's telling us really bad, horrible things about ourselves. He goes on in this book to say, the neuroplasticity of the brain. I am repeatedly heartened to read the accumulating evidence from neuroscience research that proves the neuroplasticity of the brain. Neuroplasticity means that the brain can grow and change throughout our life. Old self-destructive neural pathways can be diminished and new healthier ones can replace them. A general theory of love by Thomas Lewis inspiringly explicates this fact. This fact helps me to remember that the critic can indeed literally be shrunk via long-term, frequent and dedicated use of the thought-stopping thoughts of substitution and thought correction practices. So that means anytime we have a voice in our heads that's being unkind or wicked to ourselves, we stop it, because generally it is not our own voice. It's been implanted there in childhood. He goes on to say, as recovery progresses, you notice the critic sooner before attack becomes multidimensional. This then allows you to take more immediate self-protective action. Moreover, CPTSD flashbacks can be utilized as evidence of, and in later stages of recovery, proof of your childhood traumatization. Flashbacks point irrefutably to the fact that your parents' abandonment forced you into habitate to hypervigilance and negative noticing. Okay, so now I don't know who's watching out there. If you want to say hello, if you've got any questions. I'm only on for a short period tonight because I've got a meeting in about 15 minutes with somebody online on a Zoom. So if you've got any questions, then feel free to ask. So basically, I made a list earlier, and the whole point, the reason I'm doing this is that I'm helping people through the maze of CPTSD, from childhood abuse and sexual abuse and narcissistic abuse as well, because a lot of us, when we've had childhood trauma, we then get into relationships where people may mistreat us, and we haven't got the proper tools and skills to understand how to handle it. And then through Pete Walker's book, I've learned to renegotiate my life and, be more upstanding and able to speak out and speak my truth. So the Pete Walker Complex PTSD book, I got that in December 2017, and I didn't start reading it until about February 2018, but I was ready for that book, and it's really the book that spoke to me more than anything else I read on complex PTSD, trying to understand early childhood trauma. It's a workbook through the maze of the tragic pain that people have to go through in childhood, and it brings us out the other side. So it allowed me to see, literally see properly, and begin my healing process. I just read page 185, chapter 9. Also, I think that actually I'm referring to that. So flashbacks, and if you don't know what flashbacks are, those are the reactions we have to childhood trauma, but we have them as an adult, being afraid and acting out, not intentionally, but trying to protect ourselves. And it causes a lot of problems for us, isolation and all sorts of things. So we've got to confront our inner critic. And Pete Walker says that this is essential. And I can tell you it is, and that the more we do it, it works. We stop hounding ourselves and hurting ourselves. So it's allowed me to have healthy anger and healthy blame. And it also allowed me to grieve fully, because a lot of us don't grieve until our adulthood, when we realize we stop disassociating and we realize how much grief we have in us. And also it stops us bypassing our feelings, and that will apply also as an adult. We'll stop tolerating less than behavior from others, and we'll stop tolerating it from ourselves as well. And it's a healthy self-defense. When we deal with our inner critic, we're protecting ourselves, and then we make better choices. That's the other thing. And I will say that those who have not had abuse won't get it. They really generally don't get it. And it can be very difficult when we're in relationship with people who've not been through abuse, when we have flashbacks, because they don't understand that a lot of people, not on purpose, but they'll suggest things like, oh, let it go, it's in the past, they're your parents, you've got to forgive them. And that's very triggering for people that have been, had been violated as a child. It's very difficult to accept that. And then by working on our inner critic, we will get rid of guilt and the toxic shame, and we will strengthen in dealing with our inner critic. But if we are told that we have to forgive and just let it go and discard our true pain, then we end up the guilt and the toxic shame increases. So we've got to take our healing into our own hands. And it's not all or nothing. Some days we'll have good days, and some days are not so good. And that's normal. That's healthy, normal, the way life is. So it's not all or nothing. And we've got to stop beating ourselves up and thinking that it's got to be all or nothing. We're like the weather. We change daily, moment by moment. So it's not healthy to deny what hurts us, or what did hurt us, or what has affected us. And we've got to take on our feelings. It's what guides us through life. And then we heal layer by layer. And what I've noticed, and this is really fabulous, that I had a lot of autoimmune issues, a lot of, upset tummies and, sinus issues and stuff like that. And the more that I've got into a healthy diet, eating healthy foods, not going mad, but just being realistic, no junk. And the more that I've dealt with my inner critic, the healthier I've got. So it's really worth taking that on board, that if you've got aches and pains and got gripes about your health, the more you deal with your inner critic, the more your health's going to improve, because you're going to not be putting yourself into fight, flight, freeze response. And that's, you know, it's a beautiful thing. I'm just grateful that I've done this work myself. In the book, he has 14 common inner critic attacks, and that's on his webpage. I'll put the links below after I end this video, and also 13 steps for managing flashbacks, which is a really useful tool to get familiar with. And it's a process, it's a daily process, and the more knowledge we get on this subject, the better life's going to get. So that's it for today. I don't know who's watching, but thank you for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow. Thank you. I'm going to close and come out of my end my meeting. Let me see. Okay. Thanks for watching.